Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and being here with us today during our first ever Kaleidoscope State of Play event. We'll be sharing today about the current state of play across the journalism ecosystem in ways that impact Black, Native, Latine, Asian folks, but also impact everyone because what we know is if our folks aren't free, everyone's not free. That applies to journalism and our information ecosystems as well. So, what we know is that the state of play for Black, Native, Latine, Asian newsrooms and journalism impacts the state of play for journalists everywhere. Um, so before we get started, I'd love to tell you a little bit about myself and about the work of the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund, who's hosting this gathering today. So I'm gonna share some images with y'all. All right. Well, that's taking too long to process. So, what I'll do instead is I want to share a question with you all. It's a question that guides a lot of the work that we're doing, and that question is, what does it feel like, sound like, look like when there's a thriving, abundant information ecosystem full of Black, Native, Asian, and Latine practitioners serving Black, Native, Asian, and Latine communities? That is our North Star question. It's the question that guides all of the work of the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund. The Racial Equity and Journalism Fund is a fund that is co-created and co-curated by my colleagues Talia Jones and Jessica Nguyen. Talia Jones is our program officer. Jessica Nguyen is our program associate. You can't see those folks right now. Those folks are in the background of this, making all of this possible. But I really want to lift their work up because if it were not for them, none of this would be happening. And so what I want to invite you to do is in the comments below, I invite you to drop. I'm going to ask you a question. I'd love you to drop a response to it. And so I'm curious, as you think about the future, when you think about 25 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what is something that seems so impossible or extraordinary right now that you hope is mundane in the next 50 years? So, my question for you, and then I'm going to ask folks if you'll just drop it in the comments below. What is something that you hope is mundane in 50 years from now? Something that's so normal, so common sense, something that everybody is doing or everybody knows, something that seems impossible as a common sense right now, something that seems extraordinary as a common sense right now, but that is mundane in the future. And as you're thinking about those things, I would encourage you to share that throughout our time together. If you hear someone speaking, if you hear something going on or something comes to you, I invite you to drop that in the chat whenever that comes to you. Um, because our hope with this work, our hope throughout all the speakers who are going to be presenting today, is that the things that we are iterating now, the things that we are practicing now, that those are things that become normal in the future, that they are common sense, that they are happenstance. Our hope is that it is not unusual. It is not extraordinary to support Black, Native, Latine, and Asian journalists. It's not extraordinary to support Black, Native, Latine, and Asian artists and cultural organizers and community members. It's not extraordinary to think about all Black, Native, Latine, Asian communities having the community power we need to make things happen that serve us and serve our folks. it's not extraordinary to think about our stories being told in abundance. So the work we do now is work to practice that world, work to iterate that world, so that in the next 50 to 100 years, 25 years, next 5 years maybe, that world is normal. And so, to make that happen, that's not something that we can do alone. And so I want to take a moment to lift up some of the folks that are making that happen with us. I mentioned earlier that I exist in the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund alongside other folks who co-create this work. But it's not just the folks on this team who make this work possible. It's also all of the organizations that we work with. And I want to tell y'all that our squad is deep, y'all. Our bench is long. The folks who are on that bench include folks in Arizona, California, DC, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, North Carolina, North Dakota, New York, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin. It's in every single one of those places that there is a co-creator, a co-curator across this BIPOC information ecosystem that is a part of the network that we have alone. And that is not even including all of the folks that we partner with. So when you think about this work and you think about the presence of this work, I want you to know that we're everywhere. And we're building the network wider. And so I'm really excited today to present the work of folks who are figuring out what is the state of play when it comes to Black, Native, Latine, and Asian media. I'm gonna pass it off in just a moment, but I'm gonna share with you the cadence that we're gonna take. We're gonna start with the future, right? I invited you all into the future, and so we're gonna start with the future. And then we're going to come back to where we are now. We're going to come to what it's taken to get us where we are now. And then we're going to end with what are the resources we have to mobilize to make the future that we envision together real. And what I know is that we are going to make that future. What I know is that our communities will be here in 50, 100 years. What I know is that our communities have survived apocalypse before, and I have no reason to doubt that we will not continue to survive whatever comes our way. It's just a matter of how we do it, and it's just a matter of what we mobilize and the pace in which we do it and who wants to get on board, right? I know that we'll be here. I know that we'll be doing this work together. I know that we will be powerful, and it's just the question is just how. And what is that going to look like? What's it going to feel like? What's it going to taste like? What's it going to smell like? And so in just a moment, you're going to hear from Colette Watson and Alicia Walters from Black Future Newsstands, Mukhtar Ibrahim from Sahan Journal, Dr. Alyssa Richardson from the Charlotta Bash Journalism and Justice Lab, Jess Pierce and Brian Perlmutter from Piece by Piece Strategies, and Juanita Negron from the Thriving BIPOC Journalism Project. So each of these folks are going to be sharing from their purview in the world, from their perch, the state of journalism, the state of play right now. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Alicia Walters and Colette Watson from the Black Future Newsstand. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you everyone who's a part of shaping this convening. My name is Colette Watson. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm one of the co-creators and current director of the Media 2070 project, a partner in Black Future Newsstand.
And good morning, good afternoon, whatever time zone you're in. I hope the day is beautiful where you are. Thank you for joining us. I'm Alicia Walters. I'm the creator of the Black Thought Project, and it's my honor to be in partnership and collaboration with Colette Watson and the team at Media 2070 to bring the world the Black Future Newsstand, the first of many.
Yes. And in case you're wondering what that means, Black Future Newsstand is a live, custom-built, interactive art installation that Alicia and myself and a team of, goodness, I think about 11 co-creators. I may have that number wrong, but we've worked together over the last year to lovingly develop and curate and bring into the world. In terms of our collaboration, Black Thought Project is modeling the world we want to live in so many ways. And Media 2070 Project is dreaming up the reparations that make that world possible and the media that will get us there. And so when you visit Black Future Newsstand, when it launches June 13th through 19th in Harlem, you'll see on the outside of it chalkboard walls that represent Black Thought walls by the Black Thought Project. And Alicia will tell you more about that. But what we are inviting folks to do is to witness Black folks from the community coming up to share their own dreams, their narratives, their stories, their visions in response to our prompts there on those walls, coming from a place of love for us and sharing them in real time, in a protected physical space. And on the inside, we're displaying art, magazines, newspapers, and other publications that demonstrate how these narratives can be planted, cultivated, and flourish via the soil that is our media system. So this is a newsstand that's dripping with Black love, with care for Black well-being as an antidote to a history of anti-Black media harm. We're also experimenting with cross-partnership between artists, builders, publishers, art institutions, and community to uncover what it could look like to protect and cultivate Black stories in the public sphere. Thank you for sharing the website you see here on the screen. And I'll pass it to you, Alicia, to tell folks a little bit more about what they can expect and all the love you've poured into this project.
Yeah, so this has been a couple years of dreaming and scheming in the making, right? Things like this don't just happen overnight. And so I want to share with you something that we don't, it's not on the website, but because this feels like kind of an insidery space, I want to share with you the purpose statement that we came up with early on in the project that has undergirded, before we ever knew what this thing would physically look like. This is what we knew we wanted and the reason why we were creating this thing. And I'm going to also put it in the chat because it can be wordy. So we are creating Black Future newsstands to invite people into a legacy of Black truth-telling, storytelling, and creation, as we collectively dream up and create a media system and culture that further Black liberation and reflect the wholeness of Black experiences. Chills. Part two of that is that we're creating these newsstands to experience the possibility of journalism that beautifully represents our joy, that we have the power to influence and shape, and that comes from us, where journalists, artists, and media makers collaborate to listen deeply to us, to share our truths, to make space for our grief, and to reflect back our beauty and possibility. So that's why we wanted to do this, right? This is the media system that we're envisioning. This is the media system that Media 2070 is tirelessly, but also getting their rest, working to get media reparations so that we can build it, because this is what our folks deserve, right? In every community. So what folks can experience with this is that as Media 2070 and their media reparations model talks about Black folks being able to have control and ownership over our stories and narratives through the entire cycle of ideation, creation, through distribution. And I would just add experience, right? How do you then experience the media that's out there that we've made? We wanted to replicate that for folks. So we have created this beautiful 3D 10 by 10 by 10 newsstand that you can walk into, that, as Colette said, is dripping with Black media on the inside, right? That has been lovingly created by historically, longstanding Black newspapers, zines by artists from around the country, and glossy mags that just show us in all our fabulousness, best, and whatever else. But then also on the outside, folks get to right on the newsstand itself, because it'll be a Black thought wall that only Black people can write on, in response to questions, what do you love about yourself, right? Centering us from a place of love, creating media from a place that loves us, right? Also responding to what the media that loves Black people looks and feels like. Like, tell us what that looks like. What would that look like for you? And then also being able to share on a wall what stories they long to share and receive from this media that loves them. So having collected these responses and experiences and perspectives, we'll then be able to we're hosting a zine making workshop so that folks can transfer what they've witnessed and shared on the wall into zines that we can then offer again in the newsstand. So we're completing that entire cycle where folks really get to feel like they are, not only they're feeling like it's happening, right? They're creating the media that loves us. And that has been our guiding question, is what is a media that loves Black people look and feel and taste and sound like in a world where reparations are real? So that's part of the experience. As Colette mentioned, we have a launch week of activities. So if you're in the New York area, we would love to see you at the Museum Mile Festival, or the Schaumburg Lit Fest, or for our VIP reception on Friday, June 16th, or our zine making workshop. So you can check all of this out at the website, blackfuturenewsstand.com, and please RSVP there. I'll just say, in terms of so these are the publications and contributors thus far. We're still adding more every day. Just quickly to name some of the things that we're learning from this process is that this is so needed for so many Black creators and publishers who are in need of distribution, right? A lot of folks, the work that they create gets turned away from a lot of other places. And so it has not taken much convincing at all for people to be like, yes, where can I sign up? I love this. Thank you so much. This is so needed. Can you also bring it to this city and everywhere? So just how needed it is for us to have a space and the distribution as we think about infrastructure for where our media can go. Many creators are sitting on a lot of inventory because they don't have a place to get this out into the world. So that's something for us to think about. And it's often a labor of love, obviously a love of Black people. And so they are the media that already loves Black people, right? So if we're envisioning it, how do we create the infrastructure so that we can put our work that loves Black folks into the world? So this is one manifestation. And the last thing I'll just share is the importance of collaboration and co-creation in this process. It ensures so much abundance. It ensures that our work is the most far-reaching and vibrant and reflective of the multitudes, the multidimensionality of the Black experience in so many different facets. And I'm sure I won't have to tell anybody here that takes time, that takes intention, that takes trust, that takes resources and energy that we often don't get the privilege of having. But we are grateful for the support we've gotten from Borealis and from the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund to bring this all together. So I'll pause there and hand it back over to Colette.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I hope you all enjoyed that preview of Black Future Newsstand, debuting in about 2 weeks. And the last thing that I'll just offer is that, as Alicia described, that future media that loves Black people, a media that I think all of the folks here gathered represent. Media 2070 Project and our quest toward media reparations is really one that sees a future where we have abundant resources with which to make this media that loves Black people real. One in which we are no longer having our labor exploited and seeing the profit model for news and information and other media be one that is grounded on and defined by anti-Blackness. Instead, we envision a future media where folks are abundant with resources, editorial power, distribution power, creation time, and all of the things that are needed to get our stories out into the world via a strong and healthy infrastructure that's been reshaped and transformed into something completely different from what exists in this time now. And we're not waiting until 2070. We're doing the work now to demonstrate what that media system looks like, what that infrastructure could be, and to gather the resources and the power building that's necessary to make it real through steps we take today. So I just want to thank you, Alicia, and thank everyone who's a part of Black Future Newsstand. You can see all of the creators and all of the publishers listed at blackfuturenewsstand.com. And we hope to see you in Harlem in June. If for some reason you can't join us, the newsstand will be on display at our wonderful partner facility, the Africa Center, until July 31st, right there at Central Park and 110th, I believe, in Harlem. So thank you again. And Alicia, if you would like to close us out, you may, but that is it from my end. I'm going to live in the Black future now.
Hello, my name is Mukhtar Ibrahim. I am the founder and publisher of Sahan Journal. We are a nonprofit news organization that covers Minnesota immigrants and communities of color. We launched Sahan Journal after several years of working in local media. And I was a reporter for the local newsrooms in Minnesota, such as the Star Tribune, the largest newspaper in the state, and Minnesota Public Radio, a large radio station that covers the whole state. And throughout my time working in these newsrooms, as I was building my career, I realized that there was a lot of gaps in the local media environment. As an immigrant who was new to the country and a Muslim person and a Black, I was working in a system where my stories are not really reflected well in the media. And I tried to do everything that I can when I was in those newsrooms in terms of passing on story ideas to my colleagues and the editors, my colleagues coming to me with some needs such as translations and passing contact information to the community, to people that I know, and doing multiple jobs in the newsroom, and felt that I was really carrying a lot of duties and jobs in those newsrooms. I was really eager to do good journalism that reflects the needs and experiences of my communities, deeply community-centered journalism that services new ideas, new people, new issues that no one else is covering. And I felt I was only one person who was doing that, and felt a lot of challenges and struggles in those newsrooms, and kind of decided that I had only two options. I will, continue working in these newsrooms, change beats every couple of years. And I saw my path in those newsrooms where I can advance my skills in journalism and doing investigative reporting and whatever that I was interested in, or I will leave the system that wasn't really centering the issues that I care about the most. So I decided to leave my job at the Star Tribune covering Minneapolis City Hall and launched Sahan Journal in 2019, just before the pandemic, just a couple of months before the murder of George Floyd. And I really had no roadmap when I stepped into this role. I had no mentor. I had no idea about nonprofit journalism. I had no business experience. The only thing I knew best was reporting and writing. And I also faced a lot of challenges when I stepped into this new role and realized the inequities in philanthropy. As I was, trying to connect with people and funders and trying to fundraise, I was seeing other nonprofits launching with millions of dollars, and just wondered how that could be possible for me. And I was really patient. I was not rushing or anything like that. The first 18, 20 months, it was just really me building the website, trying to establish connections with funders, trying to sell the idea, and convincing people that this journalism is needed. Journalism for communities of color is needed. Journalism that really cares and centers the experiences of communities of color in Minnesota is needed. And I faced a lot of skepticism from people who asking me if that's a viable idea, if that's something that's needed. And in Minnesota, being in Minnesota itself has also presented a lot of challenges. As many of you know, Minnesota has a vibrant media environment. We have 2 newspapers, we have a radio station, we have several TV stations. But when you go to those websites and listen to the radio or read the paper, you will think Minnesota is not really diverse. The stories that are published and broadcasted on those media outlets really overlook and sometimes misrepresent the stories of communities of color and immigrants in the state. So when I stepped into this new role, I faced a lot of challenges in the philanthropy sector itself. And I thought this would be a very simple idea that if someone hears about it, they will really invest and understand the need to have a news outlet that covers communities of color in a community-centered way. So the killing of George Floyd was a really wake-up call for a lot of local foundations in the state. We brought in very talented journalists of color just 4 days after the murder of George Floyd. And those were reporters we got through Report for America. And now the biggest story of our time was in our backyard. And now we have at least, a couple of reporters dedicated to telling the stories of people who are impacted the most by what we have seen during that time. And all of a sudden, we got a lot of attention by our coverage, the way we are centering the voices of communities, the way we are inviting the community to talk about issues that matter to them. We are not just covering about communities of color. We were convening and talking and bringing them into our newsroom to talk about issues that were happening around the uprising. And that journalism is something that I really wanted to do, one of those newsrooms, and engaging the community, understanding their needs, so that you can produce quality journalism that is fair, that is true to the experience of these communities. And that's not just superficial. You're not just going into those communities when a killing happens or when a tragedy strikes, but you are within the community, living and going, and they are seeing yourself, and you're a reporter who is present all the times so that you can tell good stories. I urge everyone on this call to go to our website. You can see the diversity and the quality and the richness of the stories we produce. And this is quality journalism that anyone can really produce. My peers in the mainstream media can produce this journalism. And it's just for them to really change the mindset and see there are communities that are not really covered well in the local media. And I have been really pushing that in those newsrooms and realized I cannot really change the system. I have been fighting a system, and when you step out of that system, you can see what's possible. And now Sahan Journal is a thriving nonprofit news organization. We have a full newsroom of 6 staff members who are writing and telling these stories with communities. We have editors, we have producers, we have community engagement team, we have a business team, and a newsroom that really is for BIPOC audience needs to find its resources that will enable it to be a thriving nonprofit news organization. And that means philanthropy needs to play a big role in making that possible, because if we don't get the investment in that is equal to the problem that we are solving, then we are really going to be facing a lot of challenges going forward. We are solving problems that people have been talking about centuries in terms of diversity and lack of stories for our communities and lack of journalism that truly reflects our communities. And now people like me and other outlets like Outlier Media documented Capital B are doing this work. And those newsrooms that really stepped up need to have the right investment that will allow them to be a thriving nonprofit news organization that can innovate, that can create products, that can hire journalists and reporters, and lead the way to what could be possible down the road. Our journalism is really centered in the needs of our communities. That's all we do. And we are building an infrastructure in Minnesota. My goal is to make Sun Journal the main primary source of news in the state. I am not really comfortable being a niche or small. I want to be the same caliber as the Star Tribune and NPR and other media outlets in Minnesota. And we are getting there. We have been around for only 3-4 years, and our journalism is read by all our communities, by decision makers in politics, by everyone in our communities. And we are going to get there in the next couple of years. It's just a matter of what kind of investment do we need that will allow us to get there. Is it going to be quicker, or are we going to be patient? Because I know for sure that will be a primary source of news in journalism in Minnesota that can reshape and change the narratives around immigrants and communities of color in Minnesota. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can see my screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can. My name is Dr. Alyssa Richardson, and I'm very excited to talk to you today about the Charlotta Bass Journalism and Justice Lab. The USC Charlotta Bass Journalism and Justice Lab was born, like many of our other organizations that we've discussed today, out of a love for Black people and an appreciation for the turmoil that we were experiencing in 2020 and in many years prior. For me as a native Washingtonian, when I saw this picture of John Lewis, may he rest in peace, I saw this Black Lives Matter mural as a sign that progress was coming. In Washington, D.C., we don't get many monuments that are dedicated to us, and we also don't get permission in many cases to declare that Black Lives Matter in such a public way. So when I saw this picture, it struck me for two reasons. Because as a scholar of the Black media and the Black press, I know that John Lewis was an expert in making sure that the media knew exactly what he was up to at all times. Everything was on purpose, every picture was planned and staged, and every protest was planned down to the minute to anticipate when journalists would be in town to cover what it is that he was doing. So I knew that this, as his last public appearance, was no accident. The fact that he would do this looking out at the Washington Monument and over the Black Lives Matter mural really spoke to me. And the fact that he's wearing a 1619 hat in honor of Nicole Hannah-Jones's brave journalism just really created a confluence of emotions in me. That July in 2020, he passed on and became an ancestor on the same day as C.T. Vivian. And I was struck at that time, being a mobile journalism scholar also, is that a lot of the content that was being created on Black folks' phones to chronicle that era were disappearing within 24 hours in many cases, because that's what social media is designed to do. And so I realized that tomorrow's archives are really built today. The only reason that we remember John Lewis so lovingly, and we remember A. Philip Randolph and many of the heroes of the civil rights movement, is because they planned to save all of the images that would define them later and describe their fight. But another thing I found out is that these archives are in jeopardy so much these days because we don't own those pipelines. We don't own the social media platforms upon which they are published. Another thing I recognize is that the Charlotta Bass Journalism and Justice Lab needed to be born. It needed to come alive because so much of what we know about American social justice journalism and the civil rights movements and everything that flowed after them is centered either in the US South or on the East Coast, where I'm from. But as an East Coast girl who was born in Washington, D.C., grew up in Maryland, then went to school at Xavier University of Louisiana for college, I didn't know much about California until I got the job at USC. And so, like many Black folks before me, I decided to go west and explore. What I found was a treasure trove of things that I was embarrassed that I didn't know earlier. I didn't know who Charlotta Bass was. I didn't know her immense contributions to not only journalism, but American democracy. And it really set me on a path to create not only a love letter to her, but a love letter to the Black press and a love letter to all the African Americans who have been on the West Coast, fighting all the way from over here to make America better. And this is where the Charlotta Bass Journalism and Justice Lab came from. Charlotta Bass was the first Black woman to own and operate a newspaper on the West Coast and arguably in the nation. And her California Eagle really inspired this influx of Black migration westward. We often think of the Great Migration going from south to north, but from what I've learned about Charlotta Bass of these last few years of really just digging into her archives and just falling in love with her work, a lot of what she studied and a lot of what she stood for could have been pulled from the pages of today. She wrote so regularly about police brutality and fair housing, coalition building among other communities of color. And it was so modern, even though this was back in the 1950s when she was at her height. She even was the Vice President Kamala Harris before Kamala Harris and was nominated for, even though she didn't win, Vice President of the United States in 1952. And she headed up the Progressive Party. And I thought, why don't we learn more about this amazing woman? Now, as someone who has studied and been a journalist, has worked at Jet Magazine, really cut my teeth at the oldest magazine in the nation, and really studied our progression as Black folks for how we have leveraged every single medium that there is to get the word out that America still has not made good on its promises. I, in 2020, published a book, Bearing Witness While Black, that encompassed all of this. And Bearing Witness While Black was written before the murder of George Floyd. And it really studies the progression of these three overlapping eras of domestic terror against Black people, from slavery to lynching to police brutality. And in the book, I'm arguing that in each of those eras, we have exemplars who were using their media of their time, whether it was Frederick Douglass with newspapers, and then passing that baton to Ida B. Wells with newspapers, to then passing that baton yet again to John Lewis, who fought through television airwaves and photographs, to today's heroes and heroines who have used smartphones to show that the police don't always tell the truth. That's what this book was aimed to do. But another thing that happened in 2020, in addition to me observing John Lewis, being ashamed that we weren't studying Charlotta Bass more often, and then really getting out front and saying, we should not just report on Black people when there's tragedy, and we definitely should not loop with the careless air of a sports highlight their deaths on national television. I then became really passionate about this idea of being more purposeful and intentional in how I teach journalism, and especially how journalism covers Black people. And so the Charlotta Bass Journalism and Justice Lab brings to life everything I'm arguing in that book. In the book, it's told people we have a wealth of knowledge and we have a wealth of experiences that go far beyond when tragedy strikes. However, when tragedy does strike, we deserve to be covered humanely. And there are some things that we must do to do it better. And so I went on this crusade in 2020 and 2021, talking to newsrooms across the nation about how not to just loop these images, or how to ask families how they feel about these images being put on television. And in response, news organizations asked me, if we don't put those images on TV or loop them on our websites, what do we do? How do we cover Black people more equitably? How do we make sure Black folks see themselves? And this is what I came up with. The Charlotta Bass Journalism and Justice Lab has 3 pillars. We save, study, and share Black media that change the world. There really has been no clearinghouse for African Americans to study West Coast-based Black press in however long. And so this is what really inspired me to create this hub where we are drawing a clear line from all of the things from the gold rush all the way into Oscar Grant and the filming of his shooting. And so one of the things that I want to stress today in the time that I have is that these 3 pillars would not be possible without support from this fund. This idea that came about really out of distress and frustration with my peers in the newsroom has really blossomed into something beautiful and intentional. So under the SAVE pillar, I'm going to talk a little bit about this multimedia archive that my students and I are building about the Black press that spans almost 200 years. I'm also going to talk about some fellowships that I created so my students could be paid for their work because I believe that their labor matters. I also want to talk about how I'm transforming the curriculum at USC. And I probably should have mentioned that I started out at HBCUs. I went to an HBCU and also taught at Morgan State University and Bowie State University for 10 years. And so I brought that sensitivity over in terms of the curriculum and saying, why aren't we teaching that here? And I've been really, really fortunate that at USC, everyone says, let's do it. I also want to talk about how we are sharing Black media so that people know about our impact and know that the things that we capture and the things that we're brave enough often to put our bodies in harm's way to capture deserve to be studied in a scholarly way and appreciated at our highest universities. So under the SAVE pillar, the SAVE pillar is where my students and I experiment most. This is where we get the name, the lab, because we are building a multimedia archive of social justice journalism. And my students also had the amazing idea to document all of the Black landmarks on the West Coast. So it's an ambitious project that's just gotten started, but we've been having fun with this. Let me show you a few of the students who do this work. We call them Charlotta Bass Fellows, or Bass Fellows for short. And they record oral history interviews of Black folks from the West Coast who are making a difference. They curate existing Black citizen journalism that's online, and they're growing the community across various social media platforms. One of the things I'm excited about most is that I have colleagues from all walks of life, of all races, who've decided to jump in and help our students. This year is Keith Plochek, who's decided, I have a drone journalism class. I want to teach your Bass Fellows how to capture Black LA landmarks from the air. This is us at Florence in Normandy at the notorious site of the Reginald Denny beating during the Rodney King uprisings. We visit sites like this not to romanticize them, but to remember that riots, if you will, are the language of the unheard. And I share with my students, when you see uprisings, many of them, if not all of them on the West Coast, have been tied to police brutality. When I share that with my students, they were floored. And they wanted to go and visit all of these different sites of where protests kicked off in LA. And so this is one of our outings where we were having fun, trying not to crash the drone, and also making sure that we got good aerial footage so that we'd be able to document this for later. Another thing that we do in terms of our multimedia archive is that we've been so fortunate to have amazing partners. At the USC Libraries and USC Shoah Foundation, they pioneered this technology of virtual humans or interactive interviews, if you will. That's when you can talk to a video almost like you talk to your Alexa, and you can get a response back. And so the 500 or so questions that you have to ask for this to be able to work, my students and I created. And our very first person that we wanted to talk to in this vertical that we have built is Laura King, daughter of Rodney King. We thought this is someone who has continued to carry her father's story forward. And I thought when I met Laura, journalism often prides itself on being the first draft of history, if you will. But what if that draft is not great? I felt as I met Laura and talked to her more and more, I never got a chance to know our dad as a human being. I only got to know him as a notorious headline or as one of these videos that I really can't stand, that features someone at their worst moment publicly. And so I created the Second Draft Project, which will allow African Americans all over the West Coast to tell a new story about their relatives. If they feel like their relative has been maligned by the press, or we missed something, or we didn't go as deep as we could have into their humanity, the Second Draft Project will allow you to talk to them about what we may have missed as journalists. Laura King has been an amazing partner, and we're excited that we were able to launch her Second Draft Virtual Human this year during Black History Month. It was a 6-hour shoot. She was amazing during it and gracious with her time still. Our second pillar is how we study Black media that changed the world. I am building an anti-racist journalism curricula at USC. I'm determined to make sure that all of my students who leave there have solid principles in anti-racist journalism and that they are not parachuting in or causing harm to communities that they visit. We also author high-impact scholarship at our lab. One of the things that's most exciting is that the Second Draft Project was such a hit at the school, garnering local press and the love from our university president, that we were given the green light to create it as a class. So this time, for the first time in fall, the Second Draft Project will be available for all students. Students will be able to come in and help program a virtual human, if you will, coming up with the 700 or so questions that we're going to ask our next subject. They'll learn how to use this tool as an interviewing training process. And they'll also be able to participate in ethical AI, because the AI that powers it is not a deep fake. It is really the person talking. And so they will learn responsible digital journalism. We're partnering with GRX Immersive Labs, which is a Black-owned XR production company here in LA, and I'm very excited to partner with them. And this class will also have a podcasting component. So students will be able to talk about what it meant to give someone a second draft using this natural language processing technology and AI. And we've partnered with Spotify to do that. One of the other things that we're really proud of is we've had Media 2070 visit several times in my reporting on race and justice class. So shout out to Diamond and Vinikia. We've also founded Charlotta Bass Day in the city of Los Angeles, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. One of the things we could not have done without support from this fund is also sponsor one of our amazing master's students to go home to Nigeria to report on Africans in Ukraine. Again, as I told you all, I'm a mobile journalism scholar. I love to study what Black folks are doing with mobile and social media to create their own news networks when traditional news networks may overlook them. One of the stories that I found in the early aughts of this Russian and Ukrainian war was Africans in the Ukraine were using their smartphones to document the racism that they were experiencing at the borders. And it was very hard for me to find official reports of this in the beginning, but I followed the hashtag. And so when Ilya Cure, who's featured here, came to the school, I was so excited, and I asked him if he knew about the Africans in Ukraine hashtag. And he said, of course. And he said, there's many returnees to my country who are trying to figure out where do they go from here. Their studies were interrupted and their lives were interrupted. Some are still in Europe and trying to get home. So we were able to sponsor an international trip for him so that he could report on Africans in Ukraine. And that report will be out this summer. It was also his master's thesis. And he's very excited that he had an opportunity to talk to folks who were using their smartphones in this way. Our last pillar is that we share Black media that changed the world. We host journalism and justice convenings so that we're not just preaching to the choir. We are also building pop-up installations. I'm most proud that this year during our official launch, we host Nicole Hannah-Jones at USC. This is our biggest auditorium, Bovard, that seats almost 2,000 people. And we partner with Visions and Voices, which is our exclusive on-campus event planning organization. We had students who were singing A Change Gonna Come. Our university president is featured here because she was excited about the fact that during the same week when Florida declared that AP history for Black folks didn't matter and that they weren't going to do it, we were a school that is inviting the creator of the 1619 Project to have center stage. The entire LA community came out, people were turned away, and we also had a presentation at the very end of this where we gave her the inaugural Charlotta Bass Media Trailblazer Award. This reception, which was hosted by the Black Alumni Association, gathered folks who hadn't come to the school in many years. Many of them took me to the side quietly and said, "This is the first time I felt seen at this large PWI. I never had anything like this when I was here." And it really lit a fire under me to continue to do more of these kinds of public exhibitions. We're also going to be doing museum exhibits now as we grow. My goal is to not only have Laura King at our school, which what she was here during Black History Month when she was talking about what it felt like to make a virtual human. We also want to make sure that her virtual human is available for conversation in museums across the country. So to recap everything, we save, we study, and we share Black media that changed the world. And again, this is born out of a love for the Black press that I've always had, having worked for the Black press, having been trained at some of our most hallowed HBCUs. And then as I transitioned to PWIs, wanting to bring this knowledge with me and also make sure that not just Black students, but everybody knows the importance that Black folks have made, the inroads Black folks have made using journalism as a tool for activism. And so we are saving because we have this multimedia archive of virtual humans that we're building. We have these fellowships, and students are launching this new semester, this app that will chronicle Black landmarks. We're studying social justice journalism. We're sending students out into the world to report on and to study how African Americans are using, or Africans throughout the diaspora actually, are using mobile and social to create their own news networks. We're making up new classes at USC so that students from all walks of life can learn about the power of Black journalism. And we're also creating spaces for the general public because we know that colleges by their nature are inherently elite spaces that exclude some. And so we want to make sure that's not the case with this. We want to make sure USC's doors are open. We want to make sure the public can come in and learn about the things that our students are doing and hear from some of the most decorated journalists of our time. I should also mention that Darnella Frazier, the witness for Mr. George Floyd, who recorded his last moments, was the co-recipient of the Charlotta Bass Media Trailblazer Award this year. She accepted her award at home, and we're very excited that we were able to honor her in that way because no child should have had to see what she did, but we're proud of her for the bravery that she exhibited in that moment. And she has stated that when she's ready, she'll come and speak to our students. So what's next for the lab? We're going to scale up. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that I was embarrassed as a student who'd attended an HBCU and only heard in passing about Charlotta Bass. And so one of the things that I told City Hall is that I want to paraphrase Toni Morrison, who said, if there's a book that you want to read that has not yet been written, you must write it. And I told City Hall, hey, if there's a holiday that we want to celebrate and it's not yet been created, then we have to create it. And that's what we did. I appealed to our councilman for the USC's district and asked him if he would allow us to do a Charlotta Bass Day on her birthday in February. And here are her descendants here. Her eldest living niece, great-grandniece, was 100 years old. Miss Muriel came all the way from Rhode Island to celebrate Charlotta Bass Day, the very first one. We were so excited that day to be able to have her nieces there. And we did an official ribbon cutting with our dean so that everybody could see what we were up to. And we're not going to stop there. We want to use every single Charlotta Bass Day, now that this is an official citywide holiday, February 14th, to have students throughout the city of Los Angeles and then grow to California and perhaps the nation to learn more about this exciting woman and her legacy. Her family's incredibly excited to have this lab named after her, and we want to continue to grow, whether that is through our coursework, our studies that we do with students, our events, or any new thing that we may think of. So we invite your questions later on in the presentation, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Richardson. I just wanted to check in with folks and let folks know that we are starting to wind down. We have 2 more folks who are going to be sharing about what they're learning across this ecosystem. And then afterwards, we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers. So if you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. We'll be sharing those with our presenters. And then for now, I will pass it next to Jess and Brian.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for including us as part of this really important conversation today. My name is Brian Perlmutter. I use he, him pronouns. I am the co-president at Piece by Piece, along with Jess. And I'm based in Durham, North Carolina, and come from a history of building grassroots organizations, including part of the founding team of the Southern Vision Alliance. And Piece by Piece is a movement accountable intermediary that builds capacity for grassroots organizations. We create collective spaces at the intersections of different movements to build power and impact the lives of those communities. And one of the reasons why we were excited to build this partnership with Borealis and to really think about the Movement and Media Project is because of the urgent need and conditions on the ground that both local news and media infrastructure and movement and social justice organizations are facing. There's an opportunity to build real collaborative infrastructure that gives the necessary capacity to organizers on the ground and media organizations that are owned by local communities. In the context that we're operating, organizing groups on the ground are struggling to build comms capacity and tell their stories. At the same time, local news and media organizations are struggling to sustain themselves, being consolidated and bought out at rapid rates. At the same time, we're in a political environment where $9 billion was just spent in 2022 on political ads, which mainly went to corporate broadcast and digital platforms. So what we're doing is building interventions with value-aligned institutions like Borealis, grounded in community and building power.
Awesome. Really quickly, hi all. I'm Jess. I have a PP strategy by pronouns. And I also come from a lifelong organizer and trainer. And I think it's also important that I come from the co-founder of one of the many visionary and ground organizations of the movement for Black Lives, BIPOC-100 or BIPOC 100, all of which are tennis. And I'm excited to share a little bit more about the movement and media gathering and our collective learning that continue on from that space. So a few months ago, we put together movement leaders, cultural organizers, communicators, nonprofit journalists.
Jess, it's kind of hard to hear you. Your audio is going in and out. I just wanted to let you know.
Oh, okay. If I close,
Brian, I just wanted to check in before you kept going.
Okay, is that a little better if I come closer?
No, it's glitching in and out.
Oh, okay. Well, I will. Yeah, I'll cover. Give me one sec.
And then while we're waiting as Jess and Brian are working on that, we're gonna drop in the chat a feedback form that we asked folks to fill out kind of afterwards after our time together. But we'll go ahead and drop that now so that folks have access to it. And then Jess, let's see, maybe it's better now.
Yep, I just switched computers, so is that better? Perfect. There we go. Not shockingly, as business partners, we are in the same room together right now physically. So again, yes, come from being a co-founder of one of the organizations of the Movement for Black Lives, BYP 100 or Black Youth Project 100, all of which these organizations turned 10 this year in just a couple weeks. So I want to give a little context about the Movement in Media Gathering and kind of our learnings from there that still continue into the work right now. So just a few months ago, we brought together movement leaders, cultural organizers and communicators, nonprofit journalists and donor organizers to dream, vision, strategize around where narrative change and media meet material change and movement. So 4 key learnings. Now, I'll be clear, there were lots of learnings, right? We could probably have a whole session on the learnings, but 4 key learnings from that space that we found were that first, that organizational leaders are over capacity and simply just did not have the time or the flexibility to prioritize and focus on building visionary narrative projects, especially if they were going to be sector or ecosystem-based projects. Additionally, we found that grassroots and social movement organizations simply need more communication and narrative capacity. Our third learning was that generally in the larger ecosystem, that there's a gap in kind of communications and media training that has this very specific movement and social justice, political analysis or framework. And the last one that we found was that media publications at large are not owned by local communities, which result in directly impacted community members, Black, AAPI, Latine journalists, and social movement strategists being locked out of key framing and distribution frameworks, leading us to be responding to dominant narratives instead of having proactive or visionary narratives and continuing a broad and deep presence of mis and disinformation. So we definitely have more learnings to share, and we're continuing to create a space and an ongoing initiative where we identify and address these learnings as we continue to build this project.
And so what we are, continuing to do now is to really invest in more leadership from these 3 spaces, so we can move these learnings and create new initiatives that address the current communication and media context. And so what this includes is building both physical and virtual convening space for training, relationship building, and collaborations. Thinking about space for creating ownership models and sustainability models, data projects that help us to assess and understand the climate and context, as well as history projects that help us to understand the long interaction of how movement and media organizations have worked together to build power for communities. And then lastly, fundraising dollars for the work at the intersection of this work. And so we're really excited to continue making this happen in partnership with Borealis and in partnership with everyone else who's been on this call today, whether you're on the live stream or one of the presenters, as it is so important to not only do this together, but to continue on this journey.
Hi, is it my turn? Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Wilneda Negron, and I'm going to be wrapping up this really vibrant and exciting conversation with some of the necessary conversations that need to happen when we think about sustainability and dreaming at the same time. And I am coming from the Thriving BIPOC Journalism Project. And as we've heard today, there's a lot of creativity and a lot of entrepreneurship and a lot of really thinking with minimal resources how to represent a diverse group of communities. And while that entrepreneurship and creativity lives, there's also in the broader journalism spaces at the moment a really strong focus on looking at sustainability. What does sustainability look like for local journalism? There's obviously federal legislative laws looking at that, the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, the Local Journalism Sustainability Act. There is also different financial forecasting that is trying to identify what would be the cost of sustaining local journalism, of which this project learns from those forecasting and adapts it to the realities of what it is to look at the BIPOC ecosystem. So there is a lot of focus on sustainability at the for local journalism that is seen as necessary for democracy, for civic participation, for solving problems, for maintaining social capital in communities. But many times those conversations at the policy level and at the financial forecasting sustainability level really do not look at or forecast or account for the needs of BIPOC journalism and media ecosystem. And that it's a problematic, it's both a problem and an opportunity, because when you look at not only the future of this country, we're not only trying to save our democracy, we're also trying to move towards a multiracial democracy. And that is the social experiment that America has not quite mastered yet, that demographically we are increasingly moving towards. And that is why the other side is increasingly concerned with the future of this country through various things that we'll have heard of, from gerrymandering to the spread of misinformation, to fragmenting, to the political polarization. And so I think when we think about saving democracy, we're really trying to save democracy and move towards a multiracial democracy. And in order to do that, you need to have strong communities that represent the diversity of those voices, because that is those are the voices that we're trying to weave together into the quilt of what the American experiment is trying to be. And central to that, again, is looking at thriving BIPOC journalism. And this particular project is looking at two objectives. One of them is, combining the dreaming and the creativity with, unfortunately, the scientific management, which is sometimes at conflict. It forces us to, as I'll go into a little bit more, establish baselines and that are imperfect, but allow us to sort of forecast into and get a sense of how much would it cost. And so we are trying to define what a thriving BIPOC journalism ecosystem looks like, both at the organizational and the ecosystem level. And then the second component is to look at to do financial modeling and to forecasting and to test a lot of the assumptions that go into the models that are being built. Again, to establish a baseline that I can tell you right now, will be imperfect because of many issues that I'll go into, everything from lack of data, the data that we need to just needing to do deeper engagement and consensus building around, like, what is the future that we are trying to build, because there is a variety of different things and projects that are being explored. And so establishing a baseline that can help to make both the social, the economic, and the business case for supporting BIPOC journalism. And so, as I alluded to, some of the constraints that I also see as opportunities, and drawing again from several financial modeling efforts that are been underway, is that the modeling is based on assumptions. Again, assumptions around everything from what is ideal newsroom look like, how many journalists, what's the wage. There are data limitations. As you have heard from many of the speakers, we're not only talking about newsroom, we're talking about media, local media entrepreneurs, we're community hubs, labs at universities. So there's a variety of configurations that make up not just a traditional newsroom, but in order to establish a baseline, you may need to go with sort of just the data that's available, which is oftentimes based on journalism and newsroom spaces. And so there are data limitations, in addition, that are related to organizational finances, for-profit news, legacy groups that are sometimes left out of the picture because there's not good enough data on them. There are some of the opportunities and constraints are that you need to do multiple adaptations and consensus building to really fit to local BIPOC newsroom realities, again, because of the wealth and the diversity of the thinking and the innovation that's happening. And all of this means that there is a difficulty to establish a baseline because there is a variety of configurations, again, that we could be dreaming and planning towards. And less amount of whether you go look at hubs, whether you look at investigative news at municipal levels or traditional news, legacy news, there is a richness that you want to preserve as you are trying to also establish baselines so you can forecast that is sometimes in tension with each other. And so, for example, this is what a financial model would look like that really takes everything that we talked about and makes it very dry and plain. And so one of the, as I'd noted before, one of the particular sorts of consensus building is even discussing things are like, what is a percent of editorial versus non-editorial staff that would make a sustainable and thriving local newsroom? What are the appropriate wages that can be a baseline across geolocations, everything from New York City to rural Nebraska, and also what we're seeing with financial models that I have seen, as well as the constraints of working with and establishing a BIPOC one, is often, as we talked about dreaming and really planning with future sensing of the future that we want to build, forecasting and the baseline often works from a scarcity mindset. And so you are beginning with a framework of what is the minimum necessary journalist or that you would need for functioning and informed society, or for a thriving newsroom, or for a community to be represented. Are we talking about one journalist? Would it be for journalists that are maybe in an area where there's a high Native American population? Would you need 3 journalists? And so there is the default of the forecasting is moves you toward a scarcity mindset that you have to really push through because it really makes you establish a baseline around the minimum of what's needed. And I'm listing these just because they are sort of the tensions and the opportunities as we dream to also look at establish a financial understanding of what it would take, what it would take to accomplish that dream. And so the creativity, the diversity, and the dreaming that we've heard today in BIPOC journalism and media is really a feature. It is not a bug. The way that, again, scientific management, financial analysis would have you, would struggle to sort of capture. And it's necessary for sustainability. And so as we're trying to, I'm going to present a preliminary baseline, but also knowing that is the baseline is being established to help continue the conversation. It is not a definitive number. It's where we can start to get an understanding of really the deficit, and then continue dreaming from that point on. The presentation will go into that. And so again, in BIPOC journalism ecosystems, you have individuals, you have media entrepreneurs, you have organizations that are legacy, community-based, startup publishers, and you have a variety of ecosystem projects. And so there is not a lot of data on those components. And so again, the tension is to work with the data that you have, which again is focused mostly on local newsroom, and then to create different scenarios to capture really the diversity. And so moving ahead, comparing the forecasting models in the field with the preliminary analysis that we've done, there has been a report that Democracy Fund has supported. It was conducted by Sea Change. And there a Boston Consulting Group report that is happening right now that some of you may have attended a meeting a few weeks ago for. And then you have the Thriving BIPOC Journalism Project. And so Sea Change looked broadly at what would it take to support local journalism broadly, but they did account for what it would take to include additional demographic coverage areas. And so you see those communities there. And then you see the jurisdiction because there are a variety of different jurisdictions that you can sort of estimate the number of media entrepreneurs or journalists that you would do. Usually it's at the municipal or the county government level. And then you estimate, how many editorial staff, looking at that demographic coverage areas, and then you make considering cost structures and, wages that can be an average wage that can be account for most of the country, then you can come out with a yearly cost. And so the important thing to highlight here is that for a group like Boston Consulting Group that is looking at local journalism, what it would take to support local journalism, obviously, because you're not accounting for different demographic coverage areas the way BIPOC journalism does, it is a smaller number. It is more attainable. I mean, we're still talking about a deficit, absolutely, but you are looking at less editorial staff and less of a yearly cost. Because we are attempting to represent the multiplicity of voices and perspective that are in this country, that is going to create an industry need to support more journalists and more media entrepreneurs, and that is going to greatly increase the yearly cost. And so our estimation is that to support at the municipal and the county level, the demographic coverage areas that we most want to support, many of the people have spoken here, it would require that 335,789 editorial staff. Again, this is not accounting for additional operating expenses and non-editorial staff, but this is just so it could be compared with the other analysis that have been done, just focusing on that baseline. We are talking about a considerably larger number, and that is sort of the irony and the opportunity and the invitation of this issue, and that is that while BIPOC journalists receive a small amount of the local journalism money that is available through philanthropy or other private sources, the need is actually the highest, because you are trying to account for a larger percentage of the American population. You're not accounting for just a general population. You want different communities, different communities to be represented in what they're seeing, and that is where the tension is. That it will cost more money, and that brings up real issues of not only how to raise that money, but also how to in what ways can we think creatively of making that fundraising more possibly more realistic, but also make it to where we want to be in this country in a coming 5 or 50 years. And so giving that figure that it actually costs more money to sustain thriving by BIPOC media and local news groups than general population, given that irony, we can step back and look that according to the same Boston Consulting analysis, they found that $150 million of grants and donations go a year to local news. And according to Democracy Fund, a study from a few years ago, between 2009 and 2015, nearly 1.2 billion was invested in those 6 years. That means of that money, 72 million in those 6 years went towards groups that are supporting specific racial and ethnic groups, and 24 million went to in those 6 years to groups that are serving immigrants and migrants. And so that is a rate of $16 million a year going towards local news groups or media entrepreneurs that are supporting racial ethnic groups and storytelling, or immigrants and migrants. And so we're at a rate of maybe $16 to $20 million a year. And again, to properly support the ecosystem at even the most baseline level, not thinking operating costs, not thinking of non-editorial staff, we are looking at 16 billion a year. So we have an incredible deficit. And so the next steps for this work, it's obviously a broader invitation with the BIPOC journalism and media entrepreneur community to first establish a baseline. Right now, this baseline is a baseline that should include, even though if it's going to drive the yearly costs, it should include other operating costs. It should include other components that are seen as essential for accounting for, like if we can collect information on legacy news groups, there's lots more work to be done on establishing a baseline. And then there's modeling and forecasting for specific scenarios. And so once we've established a baseline, we'll be working on a scenario that is forecasting for a scenario in which maybe we can't have a journalist of every race and ethnicity for every county or every municipal area. Maybe we can only, using census data, look at high density areas with those particular ethnic groups and account one or two journalists for those areas. And so that preliminary analysis on that end has lowered the yearly cost to about 2.6 billion, that scenario. But there's also thinking about another scenario, once you have a baseline, is thinking about the future of multi-ethnic news groups. And so rather than having a particular ethnic, local, or media news group for a high density of that ethnicity area, you think about maybe for the top 30 multi-ethnic cities in the US, they would have a multi-ethnic newsroom. That means that the Asian and Latin American and Black storytelling and coverage would be all covered in one news group. And so that could be, you could forecast for what having not distinct conglomerates of or projects that are particular ethnic focus, but having one per high multi-ethnic area, having a mix of different ethnic groups represented in one news group. And then you could do a third scenario where you do a combination of those. And you could create additional scenarios where you account for all of the media entrepreneurship to whatever extent there's data available on that. And so there is multiple, this is where the dreaming can come in, is like you can little by little start building different scenarios for and forecasting for the different futures that we want to build into. And so this, just in wrapping up, this is this work, even though it takes some of the creativity and excitement away, because again, the need to have a baseline is really essential for building the social, the economic, and really the business case. And there is a lot of overlap with other movements as well. And new economy movements are moving around similar types of conversations, such as so is reparations. And so is like spaces that are looking at catalytic capital consortiums and impact investing at the local economic development level. And so there is, if you can show the dreaming and the community impact along with the financials, you can engage a variety of different movements and have that conversation with them. And that is a hint of sort of what it will take to start making some of the dreaming into more of an actual future that we will hopefully all be living in the near future. So with that, I will stop my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juanita. We're going to invite everyone back up here for our final round robin question. If folks do have other questions that they want to drop in the comments below, feel free to do so. We saw one question earlier about Black Future newsstands. So what we're going to do is create email connections between folks so that folks can have their questions answered if they have questions about specific projects. But in closing, just want to ask all of our presenters, first of all, I want to thank all of y'all for being here with us. Thank you for all of the depth and width of wisdom that you have shared with us and for the folks here with us. And so I have one question for y'all, and then I am going to share a few next steps. But my last question for all of y'all is, what is one hope or curiosity that you're leaving today with? And I'll start with the folks who started us, Colette and Alicia. And then we'll end and we'll transition after that.
I hope for all of the spiritual and material media wealth that's been hoarded and stolen to be redistributed back into the hands of the folks who tenderly steward our stories, for the future to be grounded in that tenderness.
Thank you.
Cosign, number one. But I'm just feeling very hopeful based on what I've heard today. I feel like we got us and we've got this. And if what Colette just offered happens, there is such a tightly woven, expansive net garment that is holding this work and holding our communities, that we gonna be all right. I just have that knowing, especially hearing from all of you today. Thank you for your incredible work. Y'all gave me a lot of hope today. I'm like, oh, and coming out of this, I'm feeling like, oh, we gonna do this. We'll be all right.
All right, so I'll pass it to Dr. Richardson. Thank you, Alicia.
My hope is that journalism students around the world, whether they are in formal settings like colleges or our youth with smartphones who are just in the wrong place at the right time, I hope that they continue to have the bravery to tell these stories. And I pray that newsrooms start to really look like the communities they cover, and that people have the tools that they need to learn about other folks in humane ways and not in ways that feel like exhibits or ways that feel like they're exploitative, but ways that are really caring and nurturing. All of us have unique stories to tell. And I think that journalism is such a powerful tool, not only for activism, but also futurism. And we are planning the future that we want by telling strong stories today. So I hope that the BASS Lab continues to imagine what that future might look like, and that we invite everyone in, no matter if they attend college or not.
Thank you, Dr. Richardson. Pass it to you, Brian.
A hope that I have is that our communities that are impacted by and being over criminalized by the state right now have access to the power and the narrative to be able to control their own stories and create whatever material change is needed for them.
Thank you for that. And Juanita, we'll end with you.
Yeah, thank you. I think my hope is that really the beauty, the uniqueness and the beauty of communities can be really taken in as a strength, as a force of strength for this country, and can be honored in such a way. I think right now it feels like it is a threat to many people. And I think there's a paradigm shift that we're all pushing for, is that there is a beauty in that complexity. And I think we need to just bathe ourselves in it and really celebrate and celebrate, and also see that it's the ticket to really the future that we want, because it's a future of hopefully of less conflict and less division. So that is my hope.
Thank you so much for that. Thank y'all all for those hopes and for those curiosities. May it be so. I know all of these things are possible. And so with that, I want to bring us to close and invite all of you who are watching, whether it's currently, whether you're watching the recording of this, I want to invite everyone here to join us and invest in this future, invest in the future where our communities are thriving, where our folks have the information they need, where hoarded resources have been redistributed. Join us in figuring out how we make these imaginations real. And so to do that, I want to invite you to learn more and support all of these projects: the Black Future Newsstands, the Sahan Journal, Charlotta Bass Journalism and Justice Lab, Piece by Piece Strategies, Dr. Juanita Negron. I want to invite you to stay tuned in to this kaleidoscope of work by joining the newsletter for the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund. I want to invite you to share your feedback at bit.ly/kaleidoscope 2023 feedback, and we'll drop that link in the chat as well. And then in the wider future, I want to invite you to build and strengthen accountable, multi-directional relationships with the BIPOC-led newsrooms in your community. I invite you to ask yourself, who are they? How can you support them? How can they support you? How can you hold them tenderly in accountability? I invite you to do that, whether you are a journalist to another journalist, whether you are a researcher to another journalist, whether you are a barber, a barista, a cocktail maker, a scientist. I invite you to share and to build these relationships, because we know that relationships is where we build power. For Black, Native, Asian, and Latine-led newsrooms, I want to invite folks to fill out the eligibility quiz on the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund website so that we can learn about your work and figure out how we can bring you into this network. And for donors who are interested in joining our donor table, where we share these learnings on a regular basis, where we pool resources to make sure that this work is possible, I want to invite you to invest into this work and to email us at regfund@borealisphilanthropy.org. With that, I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of the folks who shared. Thank you for your vision, and thank you for your commitment.